Her car was still running when they found it, headlights cutting through the November fog like two pale eyes staring at nothing. The driver's door hung open. The radio played softly, some big band number from a Chicago station fading in and out with static. But Margaret Hamilton was gone. If you're drawn to cases where the truth hides in plain sight for decades, make sure you're subscribed, because this story will take us places nobody in Carlinville, Illinois ever expected to go. It was Saturday night, November 16th, 1957. Margaret Hamilton, 23 years old, elementary school teacher, had spent the evening at the Thompson farm celebrating harvest season. With 24 neighbors, the kind of gathering that defined rural Illinois in those days. Men smoking cigars near the barn. Women clustered in the kitchen trading recipes and gossip. Children running wild between the cornfields until their mothers called them in. Margaret arrived around 7 in her powder blue, a Chevrolet Bel Air, the one her father bought her, when she got the teaching position at Carlinville Elementary. She wore a cream-colored cardigan over a floral dress, her dark hair pinned back the way she always wore it during the school week. Friends remembered her laughing, remembered her dancing to records someone brought, remembered her helping Mrs. Thompson wash dishes around 10 o'clock. She left just before 11. Several people watched her walk to her car, calling out goodbyes, promising to see her at church the next morning. The Chevrolet's taillights disappeared, down the dirt road that cut through the Fisher property, heading back toward town 3 miles east. That road stretched through flat farmland, past harvested fields where corn stubble stood in frozen rows, past the old Keller barn that hadn't been used in 5 years, past the intersection where County Road 12 met Highway 47. Margaret's younger sister, Dorothy Hamilton, waited up for her. Their parents had died in a train crossing accident 2 years earlier, leaving the sisters to share the small white house on Elm Street, where they'd grown up. Dorothy sat in the living room, curlers in her hair, listening to the mantel clock tick past 11:30, then midnight. She told police later that she wasn't worried at first. Sometimes Margaret stopped at the all-night diner on the highway, got coffee with other teachers. But when 1 o'clock came and went, Dorothy called the sheriff's office. Deputy Frank Moore drove out alone, following Margaret's likely route from the Thompson farm. He found the Chevrolet at 1:45 in the morning, parked crooked across the shoulder, where County Road 12 curved near the Keller property. Engine running, headlights on, driver's door open. Her purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet inside with $12 and her driver's license. Her keys dangled from the ignition. A half-empty bottle of Coca-Cola stood in the cup holder, still cold to the touch. Moore circled the vehicle with his flashlight, calling Margaret's name into the darkness. The beam swept across empty fields, caught the skeletal outline of the Keller barn 200 yards off. Wind moved through dead cornstalks with a sound like whispered conversation. He checked the car for signs of struggle, found nothing disturbed. The seat remained pushed forward to accommodate Margaret's petite frame. No blood, no torn fabric, no evidence of violence, just an abandoned car with its motor running, and its owner vanished into the November night like smoke. He radioed for backup at 2:15. By 3 in the morning, Sheriff Thomas Walsh arrived with 4 more deputies and began a preliminary search of the immediate area. They found 1 shoe, Margaret's left Oxford, 15 feet from the car in the grass near the drainage ditch. Just one, they never found its match. Dawn broke cold and colorless over Carlinville on Sunday morning, the kind of gray November light that makes everything look washed out and unreal. By 6 o'clock, word had spread through the town of 3,200 souls. Church bells rang for early service, but the pews sat half empty. Everyone gathered instead at the sheriff's office, at the diner, at the mobile station, asking the same questions nobody could answer. Margaret Hamilton taught their children. She played piano at First Methodist. She organized the summer reading program at the library. Good families knew good families in towns like this, and the Hamiltons were as good as they came. Sheriff Walsh organized the search with military precision, dividing volunteers into groups of 6. Farmers arrived in pickup trucks, still wearing their church clothes. The volunteer fire department brought ropes and canvas stretchers. Women from the church auxiliary set up a table outside the sheriff's office, serving coffee from massive percolators and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Dorothy Hamilton sat inside, giving her statement to Deputy Moore, her voice steady until he asked her to describe what Margaret wore the night before. And then she broke, hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold the coffee cup he offered her. They started at the Chevrolet and worked outward in expanding circles. 70 men walked shoulder to shoulder through the harvested cornfields, eyes scanning frozen ground for any sign of disturbance. The county's 2 bloodhounds, borrowed from the state police barracks in Springfield, tracked Margaret's scent from the car to the point where they found her shoe, then lost the trail completely at the edge of the drainage ditch. The dogs circled, whined, sat down confused. Handler Jimmy Fraser tried 3 more times. Same result. He told Walsh it was like she'd vanished into thin air at that exact spot, or been picked up and carried. They searched the Keller barn, every inch of rotting wood and rusted equipment. They searched the Fisher farmhouse, the tool shed, the grain silos. They waded through the drainage ditches that crisscrossed the farmland, brown water soaking through their boots, checking culverts and concrete pipes big. Enough to hide a body, nothing. They walked the tree line of Morrison's woods, a thick belt of oak and maple that started a quarter-mile from where the car was found. The trees stood bare, branches like black veins against the gray sky. And when the searchers called Margaret's name, the sound disappeared into the woods and never came back. By Monday afternoon, the search expanded to a 5-mile radius. State police arrived with better equipment, portable radios, surveying maps. They interviewed everyone at the Thompson party, building a timeline of Margaret's movements that final night. Everyone told the same story. She seemed happy, relaxed, completely normal. Nobody saw her talking to anyone suspicious. Nobody remembered any strange vehicles on the road. She'd mentioned to Mrs. Thompson that she needed to get home, had papers to grade for Monday's classes. She'd hugged Dorothy's best friend, Carol Martin, and said she'd see her at school. Then she walked to her car and drove into whatever nightmare waited on that dark county road. Dorothy provided a photograph from the previous summer. Margaret standing in front of the school building, smiling, one hand shading her eyes from the sun. Police made 500 copies on the mimeograph machine, distributed them to every business in 3 counties. Her face appeared on telephone poles in shop. Windows at the post office. Missing. Last. Seen November 16th. Contact. Carlinville Sheriff's Department. The phone rang. Constantly at the sheriff's office, someone thought they saw her hitchhiking near Springfield. Another caller swore. She was at a bus station in St. Louis. Every lead went nowhere. By the end of the first week, Walsh had to face the possibility that Margaret Hamilton wasn't missing, she was dead, and whoever killed her was still out there. The first crack in the investigation appeared on Tuesday morning, when Henry Dubois walked into the sheriff's office, smelling of motor oil and cigarettes. His mechanic's coveralls stained dark at the knees. He'd been thinking about Saturday night, he told Deputy Moore, and he remembered something that might be important. Around 10:45, maybe closer to 11, he'd driven past Jacobson's filling station on Highway 47, the one with the red mobile gas sign that stayed lit all night. He saw Margaret's powder blue Chevrolet parked near the pumps. She was standing outside the car, talking to someone, a man, though Dubois couldn't see who from the angle of his headlights. He'd thought nothing of it at the time. People stopped for gas. People talked. But now, with Margaret gone, the memory took on a different weight. Sheriff Walsh drove Dubois back to the station, had him walk through it again. What time exactly? Dubois couldn't be sure. 10:45, maybe 10:50. Was the man someone Dubois recognized? He thought so, thought the build looked familiar, but the lighting was poor, and he'd only glanced over while passing. Did Margaret seem distressed? No, not that he could tell. Just talking, normal conversation. Walsh thanked him, made detailed notes, felt the first small flutter of hope that they had a real lead. Then on Wednesday, Sarah Lemoyne came forward. She'd been driving home from her sister's house in the opposite direction on Highway 47, around the same time Saturday night. She specifically remembered seeing Margaret's Chevrolet because her own daughter had admired that exact shade of blue when Margaret parked it at school. But in Sarah's recollection, the car was already past the filling station, heading east on County Road 12, and Margaret was definitely alone. Sarah saw her clearly through the driver's side window. When their cars passed each other, Margaret had both hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead, not talking to anyone, not stopping for gas. Sarah was certain of the time because she checked her watch, worried about getting home before her husband fell asleep. Walsh spread the county map across his desk, tried to make the timelines work. If Dubois saw Margaret at the station at 10:45 and Lemoyne saw her on County Road 12 at roughly the same time, one of them had to be wrong, or they'd seen her at different times than they remembered. Memory was unreliable. Walsh knew that, especially when people tried to reconstruct ordinary moments that only became significant later. But both witnesses seemed credible. Both seemed certain. Thursday brought more confusion. Bill Hoffman, who farmed the property adjacent to the Thompsons, stopped by the sheriff's office during his lunch break. He'd seen Margaret's car, too, around 11 o'clock. But his account differed from both previous statements. According to Hoffman, the Chevrolet was parked on the shoulder of County Road 12, roughly half a mile from where it was eventually found. The hazard lights were flashing. Margaret stood beside the car, not inside it, as if she'd pulled over for some reason. Hoffman had considered stopping to offer help, but saw another vehicle already parked behind hers, someone apparently assisting her. So he'd driven on. He couldn't describe the second vehicle clearly. Dark-colored, maybe a truck, maybe a sedan. The memory was hazy. Walsh sent Moore to re-interview Dubois and Lemoyne, checking for inconsistencies, trying to establish a definitive timeline. But the more they dug, the murkier everything became. Dubois now wasn't certain about the time. Thought maybe it was closer to 10:30. Lemoyne remained adamant about her version, but admitted she might have been on a different road, maybe not Highway 47 at all, maybe the parallel route that looked similar in the dark. Hoffman called back to say he might have seen the parked car on Friday night. Not Saturday. The days were blending together in his mind. The investigation was drowning in contradictions. Every witness meant well, wanted to help, but their memories shifted and changed like sand. Walsh realized they were chasing ghosts, building theories on foundations that wouldn't hold. The one solid fact remained unchanged. Margaret Hamilton's car was found abandoned with its engine running, and she was gone. Everything else was speculation, confusion, the unreliable, testimony of people trying to remember ordinary moments in extraordinary circumstances. By the second week, with nobody and no solid leads, Sheriff Walsh felt the pressure from every direction. The state police wanted answers. The newspapers in Springfield ran stories with headlines that made Carlinville sound like a place where young women disappeared into thin air. Dorothy Hamilton appeared at the sheriff's office every morning, her face growing thinner, asking the same questions Walsh couldn't answer. The town needed someone to blame, needed the fear to have a face and a name. The stranger theory emerged naturally, almost inevitably. Carlinville was a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, where families had lived on the same land for 3 generations. Evil, people reasoned, must have come from outside. So Walsh turned his attention to the transient workers, the drifters, the unfamiliar faces that moved through farm country during harvest season. There were dozens of them in November of 1957, men who followed the crops north to south, picking apples in Wisconsin, corn in Illinois, heading down to the citrus groves in Florida when winter came. They slept in boarding houses, in the backs of trucks, sometimes in barns if a farmer was generous or careless. They got paid in cash, left no records, moved on before anyone learned their real names. Walsh started with the boarding house on Oak Street, the one run by Mrs. Rita Sullivan, where seasonal workers rented rooms by the week. Sullivan kept a ledger, Names written in careful script alongside dates and payment amounts. Walsh copied every entry from October and November. 17 names total, most of them already gone. But 3 remained in town, waiting for work at the Morrison Grain elevator. Easy to work, and he made good progress until his shovel hit something that wasn't dirt or rock. He knelt down, brushed away the soil with his bare hands, and saw the curve of bone emerging from the earth, like something surfacing from deep water. He stood up fast, stumbled backward, nearly dropped the shovel. Becker had been a medic in the First War, seen enough bodies in France to recognize human remains when he saw them. He walked back to his truck without touching anything else, drove straight to the sheriff's office, told Deputy Kenneth Murphy what he'd found, with a voice that shook despite his best efforts to keep it steady. Murphy radioed Sheriff Walsh, who'd aged considerably in the 5 years since Margaret Hamilton vanished. They drove out to Becker's property with the county coroner, Dr. Richard Taylor, a man who'd delivered half the babies in Carlinville, but rarely dealt with suspicious deaths. The skeleton lay approximately 18 inches below the surface, partially exposed by Becker's digging, scattered by time and animals, and the freeze-thaw cycles of 5 winters. Dr. Taylor examined the remains carefully, noted the position, the depth, the surrounding soil, human, definitely female, most likely based on the pelvic structure, young judging by the bone density and the presence of wisdom teeth that hadn't fully erupted. Walsh felt something collapse inside his chest. He'd carried Margaret Hamilton's case like a stone for 5 years. Never stopped thinking about it. Never forgave himself for letting the investigation go cold. Now here was a body, found less than 2 miles from where her car was abandoned, in woods they'd searched back in '57. But obviously not carefully enough, not deep enough. They'd walked past her. They'd called her name while she lay buried beneath their feet. The bones went to the State Forensic Laboratory in Springfield. Dr. Taylor accompanied them personally, watched the forensic pathologist lay out each piece on an examination table like a grotesque puzzle. The technology of 1962 was primitive by later standards. No DNA testing, no advanced chemical analysis, no computerized databases. They had x-rays, dental records if they could find a match, and the educated guesses of pathologists who'd studied skeletal remains. The forensic examination took 3 weeks. The report came back inconclusive. Female remains, age estimated between 20 and 30, time of death approximately 4 to 6 years prior, consistent with burial in 1957 or 58. Cause of death undetermined due to decomposition and animal activity. No bullet holes in the bones, no fractures suggesting blunt force trauma, nothing definitive. The skull showed possible damage, but the pathologist couldn't confirm whether it occurred before or after death. They needed dental records for positive identification. Walsh obtained Margaret Hamilton's dental records from Dr. Paul Reynolds, who'd been her dentist since childhood. Reynolds had closed his practice in '61, retired to Arizona, but he'd left his files with his successor. The records went to Springfield, along with a formal request for comparison. Walsh waited. Dorothy Hamilton waited. Now 28 years old, unmarried, still living in the White House on Elm Street, still teaching at the same elementary school where her sister once worked. The dental comparison came back uncertain. Several characteristics matched. Several didn't. The forensic odontologist noted that the remains showed evidence of 2 fillings in the upper molars, consistent with Margaret's records. But the overall condition of the teeth made definitive identification impossible. The bone structure was similar, but not conclusively identical. They were looking at a probable match. Maybe 60% certainty, but nothing they could testify to in court. Walsh drove to Elm Street on a Thursday evening in June, sat in Dorothy's living room, and told her they'd found remains that might be her sister. Might be. The word hung between them like something poisonous. After 5 years of nothing, they had bones that could belong to Margaret Hamilton, or could belong to some other young woman who died in those woods around the same time. The case was officially reclassified as a homicide investigation. But without positive identification, without cause of death, without any new suspects, there was nowhere to go. The bones were cataloged as Jane Doe, filed away in the evidence room. Margaret Hamilton remained officially missing. The years moved forward the way they always do in small towns. Slowly and then suddenly, measured in funerals and weddings, and the gradual replacement of one generation with another. The Margaret Hamilton case became something people mentioned in hushed tones, a cautionary tale mothers told daughters about being careful on dark roads, a mystery that defined Carlinville as much as the county courthouse or the annual harvest festival. Her photograph remained pinned to the bulletin board at the sheriff's office, faded and yellowed, surrounded by newer cases that came and went while hers stayed frozen in time. Dorothy Hamilton never married, never left the White House on Elm Street. She taught second grade for 37 years, retiring in 1994 with a small ceremony and a plaque thanking her for service to the community. Students who'd learned to read in her classroom grew up and brought their own children to meet her at the grocery store, at church, at the Memorial Day parade. She smiled and remembered all their names, but people noticed she grew quieter each year, more withdrawn, as if part of her remained stuck in November of 1957, waiting for her sister to come home.